Okay, guys, Timmy coming at you here again. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different blood types and why it's important that a person with a particular blood type gets that particular blood. Couple of things you have to understand. And in order to understand why you get a transfusion reaction with different blood types, you have to understand a little bit about the immune system. First of all, that in order to get a transfusion reaction, this is critical, you have to have a specific antigen, something that's going to produce an immune response, and then a specific, didn't spell complete that, specific antibody. Again, I'm going to say it again. In order to get a transfusion reaction, you have to have a specific antigen and a specific antibody. If either one of those criteria are not met, you won't get a transfusion reaction. All right? So let's go back. First of all, real basic. We know that there are 4 basic blood types. You have type A blood. And type A blood has on the surface of its red blood cells A antigenic proteins. Preformed in the person's plasma, they have type B antibodies or anti-B antibodies. Now look, antibodies, enzymes, right? Proteins, shape determines function. If you look at this antibody, right, this type B, anti-B antibody, the shape doesn't fit. So it wouldn't make sense if you had type A blood to have floating in your plasma an antibody that will cause it to be destroyed. Body does stuff that makes sense. So whatever blood type you have in case of A or B, you're going to have the opposite antibody floating in the plasma. So look, here's a person with type B blood. They have B antigenic proteins on their surface. So what kind of antibodies are floating in their plasma preformed? Type A antibodies or anti-A antibodies. So it is clear, it's clear, you have a person who has type B blood. If you give them type A blood, the anti-A antibodies floating in the plasma of a person with type B blood is going to attack those type A red blood cells because the antibodies and antigens match. Same way if you were to give a person the type A blood B blood, same deal. So if you look, right, real simple with 2 curved lines. All right, here's the example. Here in your capillary here, you got a red blood cell, it's red, and on its surface, you have the A antigenic protein. So this person has type A blood. What's floating in the person with type A blood? Type B antibodies. All right, so somebody comes in bleeding their own blood. It takes time to type and cross-match blood. However, their blood volume's dropping, so you stop the bleeding, but you also learned that one of the ways you can transport oxygen and carbon dioxide to get those oxygen to the cells to sit at the end of the electron transport chain, and CO2 as a byproduct of metabolism out is dissolved in the plasma. So you start big old IVs and start giving them plenty of fluid until you can give the correct blood type. Because we know the best way to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide in the cell is with red blood cells. So watch. If you had a person, this is the person right, that you're going to donate the blood to, right? So you give that person, because you didn't listen, you give this person type B blood. The person with type A gets type B blood. What is floating in the person with type A blood? What type of antibodies do they have? Type B. So these antibodies preformed are going to say, hey, this guy ain't right, and I'm going to attack it and destroy it. And you're going to get a transfusion reaction, and this person, if you dumped a lot of that blood in there, is going to end up kicking the bucket. Then the hospital's going to turn you around, and they're going to punch your ass out of that hospital, and you will probably lose your license. Well, you will. There's no two ways about it, right? Because this shouldn't happen. It's that straightforward. So the opposite is true. Let's look at an example where a person with type B blood, right? So they have type B blood. What kind of antibodies do they have circulating? They have type A antibodies. So if you give a person with type B blood, they're straight. But you were updating your Facebook status, not paying attention, and you gave a person with type B blood, you transfused type A blood. Because the person with type B blood has type A antibodies floating in their plasma, preformed, those antibodies are going to attack that, and you're going to be in trouble. I hope that makes sense a little bit. Now, let's go back here. Let's look at person with type AB blood. With the person with type AB blood, they have both type B and A antigenic proteins on their surface. But here's the kicker. They have no antibodies floating in their plasma. Let's go back. In order to get a transfusion reaction, you have to have a specific antigen and a specific antibody. If either one of those criteria are not met, you cannot get a transfusion reaction. So let's look here. And we're going to have a person with type A, B blood. What do they have on their surface? They have both A and B antigenic proteins, right? What's floating in their plasma? There are no preformed antibodies, none. So a person with type AB blood, can you give them type B blood? Yep. Why? There's no antibodies preformed, right? And the person's immune system recognizes, I know what that is. I know that little triangle with that line. I'm good. I'm not going to do anything. Can you give a person who has type AB blood, can you give them A blood? Yep. Why? Because there's no antibodies, and hey, I recognize this guy. I'm good. Now, let's come back. Look at type O blood. O blood is the Telly Savalas of red blood cells. Telly Savalas, just so you know, was a bald-headed guy. No antigenic proteins on its surface. Now, this is really important. Really important. You got to get this. Rarely, if ever, do you transfuse whole blood? Whole blood is the red blood cells and the plasma, right? What you give most of the time is what's called packed red cells. So when you transfuse, when you give a blood transfusion, you're only giving the red blood cell. Only giving the red blood cells, almost invariably. So let's look at our little picture here again. And you have a person with type AB blood. What's floating in their plasma? No preformed antibodies. And again, in order to get a transfusion reaction, you have to have a specific antigen and a specific antibody. If either one of those criteria are not met, you can't get a transfusion reaction. So what's floating in the plasma of a person with type AB blood? There's no preformed antibodies. So can you give a person with type AB blood, O blood, the Telly Savalas blood? The answer is of course, because not only do you not have any preformed antibodies, but type O has no antigens on its surface. So in this case, neither criteria is met. There is no specific antigen and no specific antibody. So that is why type AB blood is the universal recipient. They can receive any type of blood. And I know we'll talk about the Rh factor in a minute. But as long as you understand this, you're way ahead of the game. Now, let's look at type O blood. Type O blood has no antigenic proteins on its surface, Telly Savalas. But what's floating in their plasma? That's both type A and B antibodies. So they got both antibodies. So let's look at this, right? Here's the person with type O blood, right? Here we go. They have type O blood. What's floating in their plasma? Both type B and type A antibodies. So if a person with type O blood is bleeding their own blood, can you give that person who is type O, can you donate to them type B blood or type A blood? Nope. Because you have, if you're a person with O, you have both antibodies. So these antibodies will circulate, say, ooh, that ain't right, attack it, and you're going to get a transfusion reaction. Can you give a person who is type O, can you give them type B blood? Nope, because these antibodies will circulate, attack it, destroy it, get a transfusion reaction. Can you give a person who is type O, can you give them type A B blood? Cut it out. So you're going to have antibodies for both, and if you give a person with type O blood type AB blood, it's going to be a real mess. So the only person, or the only type of blood that a person with type O blood can receive is type O blood. Why? Because floating pre-made in their plasma are both type B and A antibodies. So that's why a person with type O blood can only receive type O blood. Why? Because preformed antibodies will attack any other type of blood. So Now let's look. You have a person with type A blood. I'm sorry, type B blood. What's floating in their plasma? Type A antibodies. Can you give that person, can you give a person with type B blood, can you give them O blood? Sure. Why? Because a person with type O blood has no antigenic proteins on their surface. So in order to get a transfusion reaction, you have to have a specific antigen and a specific antibody. In the case of a person with type B blood, they have A antibodies circulating, but type O blood, type O, has no antigenic proteins, so you can't get a transfusion reaction. So let's say the person has type A blood, right? Got type A. What kind of antibodies they got circulating in their plasma? They have type B antibodies. So a person with type B or type A blood and B antibodies floating in their plasma, can they receive type O blood? Sure, all day. Why? Because there's no antigenic proteins on the surface for those type B antibodies to react to. You see where I'm going with this, right? So can you give a person who has type A, B blood, so this person is AB blood, so what do they have circulating in their plasma? They have no antibodies. So can you give a person who is type AB, can they receive O blood? Sure, because neither criteria is met, right? Person with type AB blood has no antibodies circulating, and type O blood has no antigens on its surface. So neither criteria is met, so you can't get a transfusion reaction. That is why type O is the universal donor. Now, what was happening is, even though these people were getting the correct blood type, they were still having these delayed transfusion reactions, and they couldn't figure out why. And then these guys, they discovered that some red blood cells had pieces of Reese's peanut butter cups on them, and they came up with the RH factor. It's named after the Reese's peanut butter cup. It was discovered in rhesus monkeys, and they couldn't figure out why these people, even though they were getting the correct type of blood, they were still having these delayed transfusion reactions. So let's go back. They discovered the RH factor. Again, the RH factor is an antigenic protein on the surface of a red blood cell. Now watch. If you are RH positive, you have the protein. If you are RH negative, you don't. Now, what's really important is, and I'm getting really close to the mic because this is important, can the immune system react to nothing? The answer is no. So observe. Now get this, because this is good for you. Let's say you have a person who is B positive. Positive means they have the RH factor. Can you give them B negative blood? The answer is yes. Why? Because the immune system can't respond to nothing. If you have the Rh factor, so this person, the recipient, is B positive, they have this. This person's immune system knows the Rh factor, right? I'm good with that. No problem with it. Glad to see you. But if that person needs a blood transfusion and all you have is B negative blood, this person can still receive that because B negative means they don't have the Rh factor and your immune system can't react to nothing. So a person who is B positive can receive B negative blood. They can also receive B positive blood because their immune system knows this guy. Hey, I'm good with that. Do you see this? I'm hoping. So now let's look. Can you give a person who is B negative, can you give a person who's B negative, can you give them B positive blood? Here's the person, they're the recipient, here's the donor blood. If you give a person who is B negative, they don't have the Rh factor. If you give them B positive blood, the Rh factor, the person's immune system that has B negative blood does not know the Rh factor. And it's going to look at this B positive blood and it's going to look at this Rh factor and say, hey, what the hell is this? I don't know this. And they're going to get a transfusion reaction because this person who doesn't have the Rh factor doesn't know what that is. And it will attack it and you will get a delayed transfusion reaction. So, in a nutshell, if you are Rh positive, regardless of the type, if you're Rh, you have it, you have the Rh factor, you can receive either Rh negative or Rh positive blood. But if you are Rh negative, in this case, this dude's B negative, the only blood you can receive is negative blood. And in this case, if you're B negative, you want to match that up with B negative blood. Now, let's take a look. You got a person who's B negative. Can they receive O negative blood? O negative blood is completely bald-headed. It ain't got nothing, nothing. And again, in order to get a transfusion reaction, you got to have a specific antigen on the surface of the red blood cell and a specific antibody floating in the plasma. Or, right? So if you look, let's look. We're looking. If a person is B negative, can they receive O negative blood? All day, because that O negative has no antigenic proteins. So can a person who is A negative, can they receive O negative blood? Sure. A person who is A positive, meaning they got the Rh factor, can they receive O negative blood? O negative blood. Can they receive all day? Right? No antigens, on, ball-headed completely. So can a person who is A negative receive O negative blood? Somebody stop me. Of course they can. Can a person who is A, B, AB positive, can they receive O negative blood? Yes, they can, because you're giving them a red blood cell that has no antigenic proteins on its surface. So there is nothing for the immune system to react to. That is why O negative blood is the universal donor. Why? It's completely ball-headed. No antigens on its surface. So you can give that to any blood type. Yes, them Duke boys. Now, let's look. Make this a little better. Here's the person. They have a, well, that's B. They have AB positive blood. Can they receive B negative blood? Sure. Right? This guy's B negative. You give this person who's AB positive, you give him B negative blood. The person's immune system says, hey, I know this guy. I'm straight. And there's nothing else for me, my immune system to react to, so I'm good with that. Right? Can you give a person who is AB positive, can you give them A positive blood? All right, here's AB positive. You give them A positive blood. The person's immune system says, I know this. I know that A antigen. And I know the Rh factor. I'm good. I'm good. No problem. Can you give a person who is AB positive, can you give them A negative blood? Hey, look, I know this. I know this guy. I know this guy. And there's nothing else for me to react to. So I'm good. You see where I'm going with this? I'm hoping. Can you give a person who is AB positive, can you give them O negative blood? Nothing. Ball-headed. Nothing for my immune system to react to. So a person who is AB positive, I'm good. Can you give a person who is AB positive, can you give them O positive blood? Sure you can. Because if you give them O positive blood, no antigenic proteins except for the Rh factor, and this person has the Rh factor and says, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. That is why people who are AB positive are the universal recipient. Yep. Recipient. That's close enough. I hope that helped. That is blood typing and why it's important. Just real quick. I'm going to give you my 2-second spiel on typing and cross-matching. Watch. And again, you got to get this. Rarely, almost never, when you give people red blood cells, you give them packed red cells. You're not giving them the plasma. You're only giving them the packed red cells. Always remember that. All right? Now, let's say, for example, a person comes into your emergency room, they're bleeding their own blood. You try to stop the bleeding, and then you start big old IVs, and you give them a bunch of saline. Why? Because plasma is 0.9% sodium chloride, and that's called normal saline. And oxygen can be transported in the blood, and carbon dioxide can be transported in the blood, dissolved in the plasma. It's measured as a PO2 and a PCO2. In the meantime, you get a sample of blood, and you take that and you bring that to the lab. And what they do is they do some tests and they find out what type of proteins are on the surface of the red blood cell. So you get the blood type, right? Whatever it is, right? Then they go to the blood bank and they find out, okay, I'm making this up, the person was A positive. So they go to the blood bank and they find the donor blood, find a bag that says A positive on it. Then what they do is they take a little bit of the person's blood and a little bit of the donor blood, and in a little petri dish, they mix the donor blood and the recipient blood together to see if there's any kind of goofy reaction. That's the cross match, and that takes time. So in the meantime, you're pumping them full of saline, trying to stop their bleeding, and the lab is doing their thing. So I hoped that helped. I'm hoping.